Thanks for coming. We're really excited to have Kaushik with us, and this will be interactive, so ask questions. And just so everyone knows, we're going to be filming.
Cool, guys. Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks to the team for organizing. I'm Kaushik. I'm very excited to be here today and talk to you guys. As Austin mentioned, I want this to be as interactive as we can make it. And I think the one thing I try to stress with MBAs is, like, I understand that people are coming from all sorts of different backgrounds. It's a little less, quote, homogenous as like an undergrad. And so, happy to be as helpful for you guys. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I went to Chicago booth for my MBA, so don't hold it against me. But I think I do like coming back and sharing with the next kind of, not the next generation, but kind of the people who are in that path and can benefit from that advice. I started like a mentorship network last year, which now has like over 2,000 students. So yeah, this is something I really enjoy doing. Can I just get so the agenda was guided by what the team gave me, but we can go wherever you want. Before I jump into my professional background, can just get a survey of the room for how many first years there are? Okay, cool. So all right, so 60%, and then how many people are going into investment banking or thinking about going to investment banking? Okay, cool. So it's like 2% of the room. All right, cool. And then how many people are looking at like consulting, other types of? Okay, cool. So a little more. How about the second years? Like, what are people doing? Like operations and corporate. Okay. Okay. So sorry. What was it? Okay. So maybe. So you guys obviously are here because you're interested in kind of the finance careers, private equity, etc. I'm happy to go through it. Maybe we start off with what are some top of mind questions, maybe I'll do it that way, like that folks have that you'd really like to get out of today's session, and I'll go to my bio in a second, but if people just want to, yeah.
I guess more than anything, how do conventional backgrounds fit into private equity? So
Okay.
Like military and non-investment.
Okay. Got it. And what particularly, like, what interests you about private equity?
So I just want to learn more about it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, that's fair enough. Yep, in the back.
I worked in GIR for 5 years, so I'd love to hear more about how the merchant banking division and the private equity teams have a different culture and kind of what their day-to-day life is like.
Okay.
Especially versus like.
Got it. And what industry did you cover? Just curious.
SMID-cap data analytics.
Which one is it?
SMID-cap data analytics.
Okay, got it. All right, cool. And part of that and part of this is so much of, I think, recruiting, especially in something like private equity, where there's just variability in all the different types of funds, and we'll get into all this. It's just about positioning your background, the best possible way within that construct of like private equity. And we were talking about this earlier. If you guys come from like a healthcare background, it's to if first the first path is to identify if private equity is something that you're interested in, if that's something that aligns with what you want to do. And then number two is either aligning what you guys have done already to fit into that bucket, whether it's industries that you're experts in, whether it's segments of the market, or whatever it is to align with that. And then number three is just doing the hard work and the networking and all. So I would kind of break that down. We'll get into all those aspects, but that's a good question. What else? Yep.
What are the things that you did when you were in school that were most helpful to you in
Yeah.
your class?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and you mean a business school, right? So I think the biggest thing, and we'll get into this, for me, I'll preview that. And the question was, what are the things you did in school? I would just say 3 things. One is just really get a really good understanding of what it is that the career entails, right? Because at the MBA, it's kind of, pre-MBA, you have more ability to switch, things if you don't like something, etc. This is a significant investment of your time and resource, right? So I think I would vouch to say, and I've spoken to, I don't know, maybe 10 or so business schools, and I feel like every student, and this is generalization, is like underutilizing the resources that's available to you at school that you wish you had looking back. What I mean by that is reach out to alumni. Like, alumni are the most giving when you are a student at a school versus once you leave school, they're like, oh, this is guy or girl trying to get a job. Like, why are they reaching out? So they're much likely to, reach out to you. Number 2, leverage your professors to, get connections in the industry or how to think about things. And number 3, really doing the work to understand these career paths. Like, I think that's the one thing I didn't do as much because I was almost, I was in like a private equity club was actually a chair my second year, but I was still like oblivious to like all the things that were going on in that industry. I knew I wanted to do it, and I was fortunate enough to intern at Goldman for my investment banking thing, and that was a path to me. But it was night and day about what I didn't know about these career paths in business school. So it's as much as like what I didn't do, I wish you guys would do more of, which is use your alumni network, really get to understand the jobs that you're getting yourself into, and then also the career paths. Like I was saying earlier, you want to go to a place where you can see yourself spending 2 to 3, unless you think that private equity is your goal and then you want to go via banking or something else to do that, then I think you can transition in 2 years. But realistically, go somewhere where you think you have a career path at least to like principal, that type of level. And that's why I think it's really important to pick that place correctly, whether it's a common. And the fourth thing is like, if you're able to do internships, like school year internships, etc., you guys are close enough to San Francisco, to do that, I would say try to take advantage of that aspect. Cool, we'll get into this, I guess. I'll try to get into it in more detail. What else? Yeah.
So, as an international
Yeah.
student with a financial background, but not in North America at all,
Yeah.
do you feel that in order to break into the PE industry, first you need to go through the investment banking world to kind of show your skills?
Okay, the question is, do you need investment banking to go into private equity? I think the easiest way to answer that is answer the question like what value are you bringing to the private equity company, right? So if you if you come from a banking background, you're bringing the value of being able to do transactions, be an execution person, and generally understanding how M&A processes work. Being on the buy side, that's very critical, right? I think the second thing is, if you come from an industry background, you bring knowledge of the industry. You say, hey, I know healthcare, I know oil and gas, so I get how the companies work, so I'll learn the financial skills by doing training outside, but I bring this in, right? So if you bring in so my answer to you would be, I think my assessment of knowing nothing about your background, I'm making a very general statement here, but of doing did you say Latin America or Europe? Latin America. So I would say your Latin American private equity chances are a lot higher than and were you in traditional M&A in Latin America or something else?
I did banking and private equity.
Banking and, so okay, even better. So I think then you open up the door, you say, look, I did PE in Latin America. I came to the United States to do my MBA here. So I have a PE background. So a lot of people, you'll speak a lot to people who are looking for that PE background, and then you're gonna have to talk about your deals and what you did, etc. But that opens up a lot of doors to you, and I think you have to then assess, go broad and reach out to a lot of companies and then kind of assess how the process is going. Look, to be honest with you, I've worked and talked to people who have felt coming from LATAM that doing 2 years in banking opens up the opportunity. I've done people who found a way to just do PE right away. That a little bit depends on how hard you're willing to hustle as an MBA to get this job and how much risk tolerance you have to turn down a banking offer and then wait around to get a PE offer. I would say, are you first or second year?
First year.
First year. I would say and do you have a summer internship?
Not yet.
Okay, well, great. I think, so let me flip that as a positive and say, look, now the next 3 months, answer that question for yourself. How likely am I gonna get an offer full time, right? You go out there and talk to 10 PE companies, see what they say. Some of them will be like, no, this is, you need a US background. Some of them are gonna say, hey, I like your PE background, but really dig in on your deals. I guess banking, see how the PE thing goes. And then if it's not, feels like it, but again, it's on you a little bit to kind of drive that forward. If you get an offer, great, that's a positive sign, but be expansive. Reach out to LA funds, reach out to mid-market funds in San Francisco, reach out to New York. The good thing I think for you is you have PE background, and a lot of these funds wait a long time to know what their needs are, so they'll wait till March, April to do that, but just be ready that when you start talking to funds, it is gonna take 2 or 3 months even to get a summer offer, is what my experience has been. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Cool. Because again, you guys should bring to the table your strengths and overcome the weaknesses. There are, everyone in this room, everyone has weaknesses in their portfolio, so accentuate your strengths and then find ways to overcome those weaknesses, right? So I think, and also when you go to these conversations with funds, be aware of what your weaknesses are. For you, it's gonna be US experience. For someone who doesn't have a financial background, it's gonna be transaction experience. So what can you convince someone who works at a PE fund that if a PE fund is hiring you guys to be a post-MBA associate, day one, or month one, week one, you're expected to run deals. And no one's gonna babysit. I mean, I'm trying to be as candid and transparent as possible. So you have to convince them that I can do this, right? That's my point with that. So what else? Yeah.
Just kind of the path to the operator side as opposed to the investment side.
Okay, what's your background?
Startup, a lot of VC stuff.
A lot of you, okay, cool. And the reason, are you interested in, you are, it sounds like, but are you interested in the operations side as like a long-term, medium-term, long-term career, or are you looking to go to it to get to the investing side?
Long term.
Long-term, okay. In that case, yeah, and what's your, are you a second year or first year?
I'm a third on EW.
Okay, fine. So what did you do last summer? I mean, if you want to get, I just want
Last
to.
summer I did strategy consulting.
Strategy consulting, and then have you talked to PE funds like on the operations side already?
Not so much.
And then when do you you graduate this fall, this May? Okay, so I would really, for you, your strategy experience is great. I think for you, the positives, again, let's start with the positives, is going to be your consulting experience last summer, your prior experience at a company, and also in the startup and VC side, so you kind of get what they do. I think the PE, since we're talking about PE operations, it's a little more nuanced. I think just maybe a step back, what I mean by operations is, in a PE function, I guess two main roles would be, one is investing, which is you go in and are buying, as an investor at a private equity fund, you are buying a company to kind of hold for 5 years. On the operating side, you kind of come in during the diligence process to help assess what are the needs of like under our ownership, and then actually at the time of the ownership, you're basically running point with the CEOs of these portfolio companies to improve their operations, etc. So for you, you have to kind of, I think, be like, that's obviously something you feel like you want to do. So your strengths there are going to be really the strategy outside of what you did in your consulting, but really understanding, do you have an industry of preference? Like, you got to start somewhere to be like, hey, I can add value to you guys by being in an operations role here because of my understanding of an industry. So for you, the key is going to be convincing people of your consulting-ish background, so strategy, operations, as well as your industry background, because you have to pick 2 or 3 industries which are tied to your historical background, and then, like, because if you've done tech and then you want to suddenly do, I don't know, like oil and gas, I'm going to be like, how would I, it's going to be hard for me to hire you. So for you, this funnel maybe starts at industry and then strategy type of roles, but get out there. I would say like start talking to funds and I think reach out to people like Axel. Some of these guys have specific operations arms, and even large VC funds, like some of these larger have operations arms that bring people in. So expand your horizon from growth equity to like buyout, and then understand that at a buyout level, you are much more granular with a company than you are at a VC level. Like the VC fund, you have 100 portfolio companies or 50 portfolio companies, you don't have the time to be operationally ingrained in like every single company. As a PE operator, a mid-market fund, you may be looking at 5 or 6 portfolio companies at any point in time, so you should be much deeper. So you got to convince the fund that you can go much deeper than you would as a VC side. Again, that's my con argument to you. Like, what will you have to overcome in that discussion? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What else? Yeah.
Could you, like, very basically, could you you mentioned the operation side jobs in PE. Could you mention like just the different types of paths? That's probably on your somewhere on your
Yeah. The different paths in the career path.
Yeah.
Within private equity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Investment banking in general.
Okay, cool. So let's start with investment banking, and again, I'll give you like a quick summary. Investment banking basically at an MBA level. Look, at a high level, investment banks are hired to be strategic advisors to Fortune 500 companies on growth decisions, strategic decisions, M&A, sell side, buy sides, IPO, capital raising, etc. So it's kind of a whole suite of options that a company has. So as the career path there is you start as an analyst out of undergrad, which you guys are not, and then at the post-MBA level, you start as an associate. And as an associate, whether you come from banking or not before, most of the people, I'd say 75–80% of the people who go as an investment banking associate do not have a banking background beforehand. Therefore, it's not at all something you can overcome because you're hired as an associate to run a transaction. Again, you're not necessarily hired to do the day-to-day financial modeling. So your first couple of years, you are in charge of the deal as well as the financial modeling. So I'd say the first 2–3 years as an associate is really, really challenging because of that nuanced notion. After that, you go to kind of different places, I would say senior associate, vice president, principal level, then director, managing director, right? So that's roughly the path. And each of those have anywhere from 3 to 7 years based on the trajectory. So you could you could see yourself staying in an investment bank for 10 years, 15 years, or you could do 3 years and then try to do something else. We'll get to that. And then private equity, as a post-MBA, you're hired as a post-MBA associate. So that's basically traditional paths in private equity is pre-MBA associate, MBA, or not MBA, and then post-MBA associate or senior associate, then principal, then director, and then MD or partner, right? So I think it's roughly the same career path, but I think what you're doing is night and day different. You know, as an investment banker, you are a strategic advisor to a company. So you're like advising tons of different companies, their CEOs and their boards on what they need to do to like do M&A and strategic decisions. As a private equity investor, you are raising funds from LPs, from pension funds, endowments, etc., to invest that money into companies, depending on what type of PE you're doing, whether it's growth investing or buyouts, and we can get into this later. You are buying entire companies, so you are running the transaction to buy a company. So your day-to-day, when you're doing that, roughly looks like, so your day-to-day looks like you're sourcing deals, like as a senior associate principal, you're running transactions, you're generating ideas for investment, and then you're running portfolio companies. So I think the PE principal role is actually the most challenging yet most diverse role you can get, because you're looking at companies, developing ideas to invest, running transactions and buy sides, and then operating companies. So you see the entire life cycle of a company in that sense, and then you own it for 5 years and so on. So is that helpful to start?
Yeah, I guess just like with that particular thing, he mentioned operations, right?
Yeah.
So like there's the associate path. Are there other paths, so like operations and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think the paths are more around the type of funds you join. I generally think it's around, I think there's 3 paths, and one is investing, which is the most common and the most kind of like people seek it out the most, and then operations is equally that background more of working with portfolio companies and operations. And then the third is kind of business development, fundraising, which I don't see a lot of post-MBAs get into, but if that is something that's interesting, you can look into that. But to me, the variability is in the type of fund you join, not necessarily the role, because it's kind of this, and the type of fund you join will determine how much in your role you'll be sourcing versus doing deals versus running operations. So if you join like a growth equity fund, you'll be spending a lot of time trying to find businesses because you're trying to fill a portfolio of 50 companies, whereas if you do a traditional LBO, you can only really spend time on 2 deals any given week. So it's a lot about funneling from the top down. Source, but I don't source as much as my counterparts might do in growth equity because they're out there meeting CEOs all the time. I know I'm saying a lot, but just we'll come back to that if you guys have questions on that. What else? Okay. Any other topics that people want to, like, anything you want to like learn? Yeah.
Would you mind also touching on VC?
Yeah, sure. I will not claim to be an expert in venture capital, but I'll tell you kind of what my experience has been. And then I think so. Venture capital is the act of investing in much more early stage companies. So I think the role of a VC is again very different from the role of a private equity investor. Like at a private equity investor, you're like, let's say you're at a buyout shop, you're looking to write a $200 to $500 million check on average to buy a company. At a VC shop, at a company that has 5 years of track record, has cash flows, you're diligencing that company to like get to that thing, and then the VCs, you're like, you kind of are like, you're much more early stage. So round B, round C, Series B, Series C, or et cetera, where you're like, all right, seems like a good business model. I only really need 20% of my portfolio to hit it out of the park. So your mentality is different. You spend less time diligencing than you do, like in PE. You also see a lot more deals. You spend your time is more allocated towards sourcing and to summarize, I'd say VC is earlier stage investing, smaller checks, earlier in the business model. You have to be a little bit more like willing to see the upside, whereas in PE, investment companies always like, what are the downsides of this business? And that's what you focus on because, you can't have an investment go bad, right? So the investments that go bad are the ones that keep you up at night, right? So I'd rather not do a deal than do a bad deal. In VC, I think it's a little bit switched. You're like, you could do a bad deal because it's only one of your 20 deals. Like the upside is, so it's a risk, it's all about risk reward in my mind. Like how much risk are you taking commensurate to how early you're in that the outsized rewards there are. So that's the simplest way to put it. And we can come back to that. Yeah, in the back.
Speaking of VC, can you touch upon how PE is starting to play in VC?
Yeah.
Putting some money in, getting access to deal flow, and who in a PE firm is actually doing that? Are they hiring, like putting a subsidiary aside, putting some sort of money, a micro fund to do that, or is it a partner just doing it on their own?
This is a we could have another full discussion on this, but I'll give you like my 2-minute summary
Yeah.
of this thing. Part of that is market driven, right? We've been in an 8-year cycle where everything has done well. I think that's been great if you own stuff, but if you're looking for ways to, and at the same time, private equity funds have been raising money like no tomorrow, right? So you have, partly why valuations have been like sky high is because people are willing to lend at cheap rates because the rates are low. On the investor side, again, we can get into some of the technicals in a bit, but like people are willing to lend cheaper and people have a lot of money to deploy capital, so maybe this is artificially high. At the same time, a lot of PE funds are very, very cognizant of value because there was a study that came out 2 days ago in some private equity institute newsletter that I got, but it was like between 2010 or 2011 to 2018, I think it was in the Bain Capital News study also, but like the 60% of private equity IRR was driven by multiple expansion. What that means is you bought a company at 8 times and now you're able to sell it to 10 to 12 times. Even if you did nothing to the company, right? And even if you put 0 leverage on, it's 60%. Like imagine if you put more leverage on that, et cetera, you can get more returns. As the market has matured as far as valuations as well as, you know, supply-demand dynamics, between 2012 and 2015, a lot of good companies were coming on sale. So I think what happened with private equity funds and is happening is, at the same time, smaller funds, smaller companies have been doing successful because of all the changes that have been happening in technology, et cetera, right? So I think the combination of having actual opportunities to invest in, as well as capital to raise, as well as the emergence of business models that are beyond kind of traditional PE scope has caused more funds to search for yield in more of kind of, in like the growth part of the curve. That still said, I think you need a dedicated growth mindset. Like I wouldn't join a private equity fund that says, hey, we'll do some growth deals. Like to be a good growth investor, you have to have the growth mindset. So you have to be able to weigh the upside along with the downside, whereas PE is a little bit more about downside risk, protecting against that. If a PE company just out of the blue wants to go into growth, it's a little like questionable, like what's your angle? I would just diligence like what they mean by growth and if that's something that you want to do. But it is a trend for sure because of where the market is.
Could I follow on that?
Yeah, go
Kind
ahead.
of slight tangent. So if you look at number of transactions from like 2018, 2019 until now, PE and M&A's kind of dipped down, especially in foreign transactions like China, US, 2018, Trump passed FIRMA, so that's kind of created a whole different thing.
Sure.
Do you see that impacting job prospects in this space?
Trade things, like unless it's a huge issue, is not as big a deal as the overall sentiment. I think the bigger issue we're all going to run into the next couple of years is the inevitable correction. And well, I don't know. I wouldn't be here if if I knew what was going to happen. My point is like that is going to be a much different environment than we've been used to the last 8 years, which is why I'm proactively asking you guys to build your skills now, and so you could be like, because when the market's good, more people will get jobs. And I'm not trying to like scare you guys. That's not the intention. My point is just that like it's inevitable, whether it's next year and 5 years from now. So just like doing the things you're doing now to get ahead of that is really important. So I don't think it's as related to, I might be wrong, but I don't think it's as related to these micro things. I just distinctly see it having been in the US market for 6 to 7 years and then the Asia thing now for a year and a half having done that. It's much more related to sentiment and growth than it is to like any particular like, macro, global thing per se. Proactively build out our investment theses. So that's some of the things you guys might do as associates. You should, I think, try to do as MBAs. Like, pick a particular industry, and then like go in and be like, take a company, understand like what the 10K is, et cetera, and then also build investment cases. Because the more you can do that, the more you can. And the number one thing I'll say, and there was on a slide somewhere, I'll get to it. But I think it's like thinking like an investor is what I want to see when I interview people. Having done hundreds of PE interviews, like. That's very apparent to me within the first 10 minutes of a conversation with someone if they are thinking like an investor, and so that's what I would highly suggest people do if they're interested in PE. But I guess first question, broad mandate across industries, generally across size of companies, but yeah, and both top down and bottoms up as far as sourcing goes. That's all. What else? Okay, let me just quickly give my background. It might be like beyond, it's okay. It's you can LinkedIn me. It's okay. As in like I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. Started at Goldman, post MBA, Chicago, investment banking group. I was like very, very fortunate when I joined. It was right after the crisis. I was the lead associate on the GE Capital transactions. Your career is what you kind of make of it. It's kind of I know it sounds like it sounds like something out of like an Oprah book, but I feel like we should just like be very proactive in your careers to like get the experience that you guys want. Very involved in recruiting, promotions, etc. Because I do think that was important. I firmly believe in talent. I believe in the power of people, and I think oftentimes what stops people from succeeding is like lack of information and like resources. So I think that was really important to me to do for at Beyond. So kind of all that, and that's one of the reasons why I created Elevate. I'll spend a minute on it, shameless plug, but it's effectively like this organization, which I started last year. Now it's kind of grown like crazy. It's in 30 universities, like over 2,000 kids, students, etc. So there's a lot of stuff we do there. A lot around just accessing top careers, which I didn't have, and I came from a non-target school, etc. I do these podcasts, which I think you guys, if you were interested, should listen to. It just interviews people who are successful professionals, etc. So enough of that. Just general advice I give you guys, I think just, there's someone asked about this, and I want to hit on West Coast private equity, because people, I think, are going to ask about that, or private equity in general, but again, this is what I've learned from 8 years. You guys can take it for what it is, but there are like a lot of different career paths, and I would almost say, don't just rely on your pedigree, etc. It's as much of what you've done to differentiate yourself in the last job that you've had, as much as it is, oh, I came from a great MBA school. That thing wears off like really quickly, right? So every point in your career, it's about how you can become a better kind of candidate for the next role, or a better candidate in your own role. Number two, I think it's really, really important as your career advances. This is why it's important to pick the places that you actually want to work at, and there's a good fit. So it's a big company versus a small company, medium-sized company. If there's a better cultural fit at a medium-sized company, important to do that, because what differentiates us all over the course of our career is the ability to become the best at that particular thing, or close to the best, right? So, and I firmly believe in that. And so obviously you're gonna have to pick things that are interesting to you, and that's a personal question, but also build the skills that'll make you the best in that thing. So that's something I really, really want to emphasize. I don't emphasize that enough to the undergrads, because I think they have X amount of years to like figure this out, but I think for us here, I think that becomes important. I think really the key to career acceleration is like knowing what the trade-offs are in any path. Like every path has a trade-off, right? It's either work life, it's either whatever title, it's interests, it's learning, it's people, it's projects, it's location, like whatever those things are. Really important to understand the trade-offs and be okay with it. So understand what you're getting yourself into, and then understanding the trade-offs, because if you don't go with it eyes wide open, you're much more likely to feel like something's missing and then try to compensate for that by looking, it sets you back more than it should, and it's a very not natural thing, which is why I encourage you guys to explore now to discover that, and you're all in your own individual journey and path on that. Post-MBA is all about depth over breadth, and again, this could mean 2 years out, or 3 years out, or 5 years out, but this goes back to becoming the best, is to really, if you have healthcare experience, try to develop into that if you like it, delve into that, and then get 2 more years of healthcare experience so you become the healthcare person, right? As opposed to, you can transition, that's fine if you don't like it, but it really becomes about depth over breadth, because people, as you go on through your career, will really only start hiring you for how well you do things, not how many things you can do, right? So, preparation, can't stress this enough, like, I've done so many interviews where, even with informational chats with MBA folks, where people are like, oh yeah, I looked at your LinkedIn, but like, what does this mean? And you're like, guys, you could have, so it's just, you work so hard to get that interview, you work so hard to get that informational chat, just like, don't blow it on something you can, the same way I'd say preparation for interviews, right? Technicals should be cold, like you guys should know what that is. Fit should be cold, like don't give them reasons to ding you. If you can get past that and just have a conversation about why you're a good candidate, that's half the stress of these interviews. Like it's just people are nervous and they don't have a good, that's the preparation part. They don't have a good handle of what they need to know for something. Self-awareness. Yeah, I mean, this is obvious, but I think there's enough classes in the MBA, but I think really knowing where your interests are and what your strengths and weaknesses are. I don't know, working with smart people really important, and then as you progress, I hit on this, fit culture becomes important. And then the goal is to really, like a lifestyle job or like a mindset job and not like a job, because if you're gonna do it, you should think of it as like a lifestyle. When a lifestyle, I don't mean like work from the beach or something, right? I mean like, it's just something that becomes how you start thinking about things. You start thinking about, hey, is that a good company? What CEO should I be meeting this week? Like what banker should I be talking to? What market should I be exploring? it has to kind of, I just think you're more successful if you start breathing and kind of living it a little bit more as opposed to just doing it for 10 hours a day or something like that. So that is another thing. We kind of went into some of this stuff. What else? What else do people have? I really want to make this interactive. What else do people have they want to talk about? Yeah.
Sorry. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about kind of the feel of the private equity side.
It is team oriented. Like you will be with, at a post MBA level, you'll be aligned to an industry group or two industry groups. So like consumer and technology, or like natural resources and energy, and then you will be working with, like, there'll be four or five associates, 4 or 5 principals, 4 or 5 directors, MDs, right? So that's kind of how it works, and that's how the teams are organized, and then analysts below you. So that's kind of how it works. And then it is like a tight-knit team from that, but you may be on 2 deals at the same time, so you'll work with a partner here, or a director here, and then a director here. So in that sense, it's like almost like a matrix kind of thing. It's similar to like what I think is banking. And then you obviously have portfolio companies, et cetera, and as you progress, you are aligned to an industry. So as a principal, you get aligned to like technology, financial services, healthcare, and then you've hopefully now built up that track record in that industry. Yeah, this one.
Yeah, I guess the other question I had was, most people at this school come from quote-unquote non-traditional backgrounds.
Yeah.
So what would be helpful is how you can sort of pivot into an investing role. So I get the pitch that this is the value you can add, but tangibly, how should you think about it in 3-5 years?
So, look, it's hard. It's going to be hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's really hard. Really, the first step is understanding what you're getting yourself into, right? Like, what is the nature of the PE job? Like, you have to really understand that. Number 2, it might take you, and if that is something you really want to do, I think it's a very cool job. You do a lot of cool stuff, and it's very, very accelerated, etc. Then I think it's about charting that path. So I would venture to say that I don't think 100% of this group is going to go to PE right after business school, right? So what is going to position you, if private equity is something that's interesting to you, a year, 2 years from now? I think you should try to get a private equity internship during the school year or summer. I think that's a little bit more navigable, and I think that's on you guys to like align up. So I would say get experience in school, because it becomes really, really hard when you guys start full-time to start thinking outside the box. Because you can always say, I worked in PE in business school, and then I did banking, and then now I'm here, or I did consulting in this, right? And then I would say, so I'm looking for execution ability, analytical ability, investor's mindset, and personality. So you guys, when you reach out to firms, if that is you want to do, gotta hit all these things. Execution doesn't just have to be like, I did M&A transactions like for the last 5 years. It could be, look, I led X, Y, and Z project, etc. Understand that the people you're competing with are going to be a lot of different people, so you have to find the thing about you. If it's an industry, I keep going back to this industry expertise or transaction knowledge, etc., that's going to set you guys apart. The other way to overcome that is just by doing these free school year internships that I think will help you bridge the gap a little bit. Because a lot of times, people just want to see that, again, day one, you can run a transaction, and I just look for examples in the past where you can do that, right? And there's a slide I have, and analytical ability, again, it's like any other interview, right? So how do you prove that if you don't have that background? It's like, I wouldn't even think of it as like having transaction. I think transaction ability background is great, but really use what you've done to prove to me that you can run deals or run processes, run projects. Analytically, how you think about it, how do you think about a deal, or how do you think about complex problems? Paper LBOs, LBO models, like really get behind that, because that's what you're going to be tested on. Investor's mindset, do the work to understand companies, industries, etc. How you think about it as an investor. What are the strengths, weaknesses, etc. Because a lot of these interviews, you may be given like case studies and stuff, so you have to, if you get that far, you have to do that. And then finally, fit. This is where this is like 50% of the process, finding a firm that fits within your background, etc. Right? The most tangible ways to do that is reach out to alumni. Right? I think I can't stress this enough. Like, reach out to people who you have some sense of commonality with, information on at least their career path to private equity, or what they do in it that gives you more background. Oftentimes, if you impress them enough, and they might be like, hey, all right, we have like, no one's gonna say no to free work. So they just kind of want to be like, all right, if you want to work with us, then like, they'll make you run through some hoops, but it's a lot easier to do that than even a summer internship. So I would just stress that as well. Yeah, I mean, I think like just tangibly doing those things, and then having a plan A, plan B. I have a slide. I think I had one on switching from PE from banking, and I think I have one from non-banking, right? So I mentioned like, what do you bring to the table as an investor? Like really understanding the responsibilities, like developing and taking advantage of your background. People don't do this where they're like, oh, they always look for things that are negative, but kind of putting your strengths in positive light. Ruthlessly target firms. Like this is where you'll spend 80% of your time, like networking, working with people, etc. Expand your capital stack. Maybe traditional PE isn't the route for you. Go to growth equity, like go to venture, go to debt, go to distress, like whatever it is you need to do to get into investing, do that. And then niche, try family offices. Those are like a lot more variable and they have more spots. They don't have traditional recruiting paths. So you can just email out to every billionaire CEO that lives in this area and then say, do you have a family office? I'd love to work with you. I'm a school student here. Again, I'm giving this as advice, maybe not work for everyone, but I think do that. Network like crazy. They take a long time, so it takes months to get an offer. So you gotta have a bunch of things in the air. You can't just wait for something that looks promising. Like anything can happen and fall through. So like have backup plans, etc. Be patient, but be like I don't want to stress you guys out. I hate doing this, but if you are serious about it, just put in the work. Offer to work for companies, and then I don't really think recruiters are going to be helpful for you guys. And then what I didn't have on here is actually explore doing a traditional thing like a consulting or banking if none of all else fails, and then transitioning a year or two later. But that is my prior slide on how to switch from banking to consulting to PE. Like I think say number 4 is earlier is the better. Like it's better to move earlier when you're at a banking, or rather than stay like for more than 2-3 years. Again, some of this is repetitive. Yeah, I think some of this is repetitive. But on this thing, I would just say be comfortable talking about your deals. If you have experience in banking or consulting, like we will hit you on the deals. Like no EBITDA from that model you built in 2024. You know what I mean? I'm not even kidding, because I'm hiring you to like sit in front of your computer and run models. You know what I mean? Just it's a good thing, right? That's the type of level, but do the work, do the preparation to be like, all right, walk me through the model you built, for this company. Why is it growing like this? What is the exit? Like, what is the rationale for this, etc. And if some of this sounds foreign, like use some of the resources that we have on Elevate or other things that you guys have. But I'm just saying, like, know that stuff cold, because you don't want any of the technical stuff to get in the way of you like making your impression in the interview. Plan A, plan B, plan C, like life. The further you go, and P isn't going to be the right career for everyone. I encourage you guys to explore. That's why you're in this room. So I don't want to drive people into this career or drive them away from it. But it is not going to be the right answer for everyone. So it's just about, is it the right answer for you? And if it is, then what is your path to getting it? Anything else? This is going to take forever. I won't get into this. Anyway, that's. I think I will pause there, and we're at 2 o'clock, so I want to be cognizant of you guys' time. So, any final questions? Yeah.
So, given your professional experiences, have you ever seen people from the public equity research side, the private equity sectors, and then what should bring to the table in the private equity from the public side?
Public investing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same with the equity research. I think what you guys bring to the table is like your ability to granularly understand a company. That's super important, because for someone without a finance background, it's a very kind of that's a big bridge to like cross, right? Because you understand what happens behind the scenes of a company, number 1. And then number 2 is just understanding industries. Like, you've worked in industries, right? You guys know, so like if you've done equity research for healthcare, you get industry. So now use those two, understanding financials, understanding healthcare. That to me is like 50% of the things you need to know. Now just figure out how you're gonna get the transaction experience or deal experience, and then bridge bridge that gap, and then the networking side, like figure out if this is for you, etc. And then understand why you're kind of making what about this is interesting to you. I think you're kind of 50% of the way there with your background. Cool, guys. Well, did you have one?
You mentioned it. Does anything change for like West Coast versus?
Yeah, I briefly mentioned it. Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are strategically placed. I think you should start with West Coast, just looking at things. New York has a lot more funds. So I would say do West Coast and New York. I think your school, obviously your school year internships, summer internships are probably slightly easier on the West Coast, and even like going out and meeting people. So your networking should start here because you're so close to like a very big financial hub. I think you should also here take advantage of the growth side because there's so many funds that are kind of the growth equity side, technology, etc. But also do 25% of your networking in New York because just by virtue, 75% of the funds in terms of investing is out there. So yes and no. So I would target a little bit more, start here, but then slowly expand to New York. Unless you really want to do tech or something, then absolutely stay here and do that. If that makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me. I will stay back for a few minutes if folks have questions. Anyone, whatever. But yeah, no. Thanks for coming out. I hope this is helpful. I wish you all the very best. Definitely make use of the resources that we have. I think it's like super helpful. I wish I had it. And yeah, best of luck in the process. Awesome guys. Well, thanks for coming out.